Sociologists and psychologists tried to analyze it. Parents tried to put up with it. Police tried to cope with it. No one succeeded very well, except the Beatles. John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr, known to the younger set as the Fab Four, are young musicians in their early 20s who wear their hair long and their clothing tight. Their 32-day American tour saw them give concerts in 24 cities and gross nearly $2 million. Except for the locale or personalities involved, each city, each news conference, and each concert were the same, and so was the response. The Beatles arrived, stayed, and departed under heavy police guard, more concentrated in most cases than protection afforded world dignitaries. News conference questions were the same everywhere, and so were the answers.
But we didn't come here intending to sightsee.
What did you intend to do?
To do about 30 shows and make some money.
It was good fun, except when it fell in the river.
Who fell in the river?
Nobody of mine, you see. You can never trust anybody, can you?
The Beatles sang the same songs in every city, and they performed for 30 minutes. Audiences, generally at or near capacity in the largest halls or stadiums available, reacted similarly. From the moment a stagehand carried the Mod Pops instruments on stage until the time the Beatles took their final bows, the scene was that of mass hysteria. Girls by the thousands stood, waving articles of clothing, throwing combs, binoculars, and jelly beans. In Chicago, a raw T-bone steak was tossed on George Harrison's left foot. The sound emanating from the audience was so loud and piercing that it nearly shattered one's eardrum. The noise level of the high-pitched, hysterical screams was so high it caused one's nasal passages to vibrate. Few who paid to see the Beatles ever heard them, but it apparently didn't matter. Later, they could go home and listen to Beatle records. They had obviously come to worship their idols by the noisiest methods available. Those of us on the tour went to sleep and wakened to the familiar chant, "We want the Beatles." Police and hotel officials quickly discovered that Beatlemaniacs would, could, and did go to any extremes in their attempts to catch a glimpse of these British ambassadors of the beat. Teenagers, some accompanied by parents, remained in hotel lobbies or air terminals for 24 hours or more in hopes of catching a glimpse of a Beatle. A handful succeeded, but generally those who did ended by losing control of their emotions. I saw a girl in New Orleans break through a police line, grab Paul McCartney, kiss him, scream, "I love you, Paul," and then she fainted. By some miraculous method, the Beatles escaped injury. Many of their fans weren't as fortunate. Several girls, and mothers too, were trampled in the crowds or they fell in attempts to gain higher vantage points. The most serious injury occurred in Dallas, where 3 youngsters were cut, one seriously, by a plate glass window smashed by a surging crowd trying to gain entrance to the Beatles motel. One performance in Cleveland was stopped by police until order was restored. The Beatles' major complaint was the makeup of items hurled at them during the concert. Although the quartet seemed to comprehend better than those students of human behavior the reason for this unusual expression of adulation, nevertheless it did concern them. John Lennon said,
Please, that's all I say. No jelly beans and bits of cake and things, and combs. We've got combs.
The Beatles' tour ended in New York City at a charity performance in the famed Paramount Theater. The following day, they departed for their homeland, accompanied by their youthful personal manager, Brian Epstein, and their ex-press agent, Derek Taylor, who moments before boarding the plane told me he had quit. His reason?
Personal disagreement between me and Brian Epstein, which has nothing to do with the Beatles. We're still splendid, nor with the tremendous success of the trip, which is undeniable. It's too bad. It's life. On show business anyway.
Since their phenomenal tour, drummer Ringo Starr has undergone a tonsillectomy. During his hospital stay, daily medical bulletins concerning his condition were issued. And Paul McCartney has been quoted as saying he will marry British actress Jane Asher. Unlike the screams heard on the tour, they were this time not those of adulation, but those of anguish. This is Art Schreiber in Cleveland.
What do you got that in your hand for? What do you got that in your hand for?
Did you say with the Beatles?
Yes!
This is a recorder.
Why, what we're saying?
Yeah, you're being recorded.
Hi! Come on, bring guys!
finally rescued us. And folks, when they saw, the cab driver opened the trunk of the cab, and when those kids saw G. Harrison on there, they grabbed that suitcase and it came open, and the clothing went flying. Today there is somebody somewhere that has a pair of underwear they swear is George Harrison. Now, they're right, it was George Harrison, the correspondent, but not George Harrison, the Beatle. The first night on the second night that I was on the tour, John Lennon came up to me and said, he said, you play Monopoly? I said, well, I play with my kids. He said, I got a board. I said, what? He said, I got a board. I got a Monopoly board. He said, George and I play. He said, these other guys won't play. They play poker. And I said, he said, well, you play? I said, yeah, I'll play. Well, I didn't realize I was committing myself to night after night after night playing Monopoly with these two guys. And George was always the banker. And we played not seriously. You know how long one game takes. Well, a game would end and John would say, let's play one more. And I'd be falling asleep and he'd poke me and say, it's your turn. And I'd say, you guys can sleep all day tomorrow. I got to work all day. And he'd say, one more game. And we'd play till the sun came up. Well, anyway, during a lot of the times, I couldn't believe what people threw, what the kids threw at the Beatles on stage. Not to hurt them, although that T-bone steak that nearly decapitated Paul and landed on George Harrison's foot was a frozen T-bone steak and thrown from the mezzanine in the old Cow Palace in Chicago. But anyway, they threw in adulation in their desire to worship the Beatles. I talked to John Lennon about it, and here is that conversation.
John, what were they throwing up on the stage in Philadelphia last night?
Everything bar their limbs, I think.
I know jelly beans were thrown. Anything else?
Jelly beans, yeah. There was a sort of carton of milk or half-empty carton of milk, a bit of cake I had stood in. Not much fun, you know.
How about all the cakes that you get? Do you like cake?
Well, I'm not that keen on. We're going off it gradually. There's mania for cakes, only to the thought, you see. And if we do get stuck with a lot of cakes, which sometimes happens, we always give them to somebody or other.
You were saying the Americans must have a great yen for cakes, don't they?
Well, either that or they're very good cooks. They like making cakes, you know. Somebody asked you in the news conference yesterday about Pittsburgh. What was your remark? They said that they wouldn't let you in any of the hotels in Pittsburgh. Oh, I said I didn't think we were going to I didn't know we were going to Pittsburgh, I think.
Which is really true. You don't know all the cities that you're going on. You just kind of get on a plane and go to the next stop.
Well, when we got here, or before we got here, we were given a list of all the cities. There were so many.
Yeah.
It's just not worth learning them. Just learn them on the way there.
Anything that's really bothered you on the tour, or anything that's kind of gotten to you?
Nothing really. I just prefer if the kids wouldn't throw, you know, anything. I know they only want to give us jelly beans, but we don't like them. You know, and it hurts, and it's dangerous, you know.
Maybe they could toss these streamers or something, you know, papers.
Streamers, great, balloons, things like that, you know, so nobody gets hurt, but jelly beans and bits of cake, because they must know we can't eat them once we've trodden on them. And the American jelly beans are hard. In England it was bad. Phone. You know, but they're only soft jelly beans over there, and it was rough then. But over here, they made a rock.
Have you been hit with any? I mean, actually, hit in the head.
Yeah, last night I got hit with two. And it's hard to sort of sing if you're smiling. One just got me on the temple. Another one got me on the chest. And one got George on the guitar hand. He had to stop playing, you know. It sounds like complaining, but we like the idea if they have to sell us them, even though we don't like them. Send us them, I mean, send them, you know, like people send letters or parcels, rather. and throw them, please. Please, that's all I say. No jelly beans and bits of cake and things, and combs. We've got combs.
And that was the way John looked at it. You just cannot believe the stage was littered with cake. Cupcakes, big cakes, small cakes, and jelly beans. But one thing great in Detroit, they performed at the old Joe Louis Arena, which is a hockey arena, and it was, they had put the stage where one of the goals is. And so everybody was above them, you know, looking down on the hockey rink. Well, the Beatles were really fair game for everything that they were hurled from the stands. But what was amazing was they threw a lot of jewelry and watches and things, and all the cops were going on the stage after the performance, sticking all that stuff in their pockets. So it was wonderful. Okay, now another thing that Paul did that the police asked him not to do, and of course he would love to do it. Now, first, I'd like, if there's anyone in this audience that knows how in the world all those kids knew where the Beatles suite was, or the room that they were staying. But they did. You know, when you look at the hotel building, and all the rooms, the windows look the same, right? But no, those kids knew which window was the Beatles. And Paul would stand by that window and flip the curtain or the drape and just hear the eruption from the crowd down on the street. And the police would ask them not to. I went down and was interviewing and seeing what I could find out about how those people knew where the room was. And so I come back up, and Paul was still standing by the window. And I walked up to him, and here was that conversation.
Paul, are you going to get a chance to wave? I understand the rumor, at least. I was down among the crowd, and I
saw you.
Did you?
I saw you, yeah, from the window.
Well,
I saw the police moving you on, too.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. They're moving everybody on down there.
I saw you.
Are you going to get to wave to them?
Well, I was waving before, actually. The police told us not to, but I thought, be a bit sneaky, you know. A little bit of a sneaky trick, and we'll wave.
Give them a break.
Well, you know, I mean, I'd feel daft if I was down there in the crowd and nobody was waving. Actually, there's been somebody waving from one of the top windows anyway, not one of us. But,
were you concerned at all last night when they started to storm the stage?
No. You know, it looks more frightening than it actually is. Because, I mean, did you see the amount of police that came out? It was like a little army, you know. Well, you can't be worried when you know all that amount of cops are there, you know, to look after you.
And that's just the way it was, and no matter where they went, those kids could tell which was their room. And I'll still to this day never know how that happened. Now comes the occasion where Paul McCartney saved my career. And I mean this, he really did. Go back to what I was telling you, that the bureau chief did not like me covering the Beatles tour, even though I did get to cover the Democratic Convention, which he wanted. But he didn't think that the story was worth the kind of coverage that we were giving it. I received a call from him in Milwaukee. Now, it's interesting. All the stories that I covered, all those civil rights stories, the politics, the man space, Jim Snyder was a wonderful editor, a great bureau chief. I loved him. He's passed away now, but he was just a super editor. But he wouldn't talk to me. He always gave me tips on, hey, you ought to look at this angle of the story, or hey, how about this, how about that? But no, not when I was on the Beatles tour. He wouldn't talk to me at all. When I called in my 15 stories a day, he never talked to me. I get a call in Milwaukee, and it's from Snyder. He said, my daughter's Margaret Ann is going to see the Beatles when they come to Baltimore. He says, I want autographs. Well, now, folks, this was the one thing that we could not do. I don't know whether anyone else did, but I never asked the Beatles for an autograph because we made a pledge. When we started on the tour, I made it after I joined them because I was informed by Derek Taylor, their press agent, that we would not ask for autographs. You think that I didn't want to get some autographs? Do you know that I was in Philadelphia and standing in the back of the room? Because when we who covered the Beatles, when they had a news conference in every town, we would not really sit at the news conference because that was for the local press, and we were with the Beatles all the time, so we didn't stand at the table or sit at the table where the other reporters, the local press was. And I was in the back. And this elderly gentleman, I don't think he was as old as I am today, but he seemed old to me at that time. He came up to me and he said, and he saw Westinghouse Group W on my tape recorder. He said, I know your boss. Well, I thought he was talking about the bureau chief. He was talking about the president of the company. And he said, I'm good friends with his. I said, oh, well, thank you. And he said, I want autographs of the Beatles for my grandchildren. I said, sir, I can't do it. He said, young man, do you know who I am? I said, no, sir. He said, my name is Gimbel. I own the department store in New York and here. And we were in Philadelphia. He said, I want autographs. He said, young man, you can have anything in my store, just get me autographs. Oh, I wanted to get autographs so bad, but I didn't get him any autographs. Okay, now Snyder hung up on me when I told Jim, I can't get you autographs. Okay, I knew I was in deep trouble. Now the tour is almost over. We're on our way back to New York, where the Beatles were to perform that night at the Paramount Theater in New York, and go home the next day. By the way, I have a ticket to that performance in my shadow box in my apartment, and it's a picture of it in my scrapbook. By the way, I just did this presentation, similar to what you're hearing today, to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland 1 month ago. And I have donated my scrapbook to the Rock Hall. So anyway, that ticket that I had, the cost of that ticket to see the Beatles at the Paramount Theater in New York City was $2.50. I've been offered $4,000 for the ticket. Okay, so Paul McCartney, I sat with Lennon on the plane all the time. And Paul came up to talk to John, and he said, where's John? And I said, I don't know. And he started to walk away, and I said, Paul, wait a minute. Do me a favor. And he saw me fumbling with my tape recorder I kept under my seat. And he said, what? And I said, my boss's daughter saw you. He said, would you say something to her? He said, turn it on. Here is what it sounded like.
We're on the plane almost to New York, and Paul McCartney is beside me, and this interview is for Margaret Ann Snyder, Paul. She saw you in Baltimore. She waved to you, and she thinks that she saw you wave to her.
Of course I did. I remember her now very well. Margaret Ann Schneider, there she was, looking a picture, looking like a vision. And she waved, and I thought, that's Margaret Ann Schneider, I thought, shouting. I had to wave back, hadn't I? And with a gay wave of my hand, I waved back. Of course, I'd recognise her anywhere. She's the girl with the long fur hair, and her father's got a little black penknife. I know her anywhere. Yes.
Paul, I know that she'd like to see you in New York, but you're going to have to leave tomorrow, so I'll bet she'll even be waving from Baltimore when you're leaving from New York.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll wave from New York.
All right.
And if she waves from Baltimore, we might see each other on telly.
Fine. And if I see her, I'll be sure then send your personal message to her, right?
Okay, give her my love then, Art. Lots of love. Margaret Ann Schneider. Goodbye, and I'll see you.